been quite a year. And I think, Jeff and I talk a lot about what's gone on, and I think we really try and focus on the positive, and there's been a lot of really great things that have come through this year. And I think the Zooms have been fantastic and a great way to connect with us. And one thing we always love inside the winery is having our chats. What do we call them, Jen? We have a name for them.
Fontababe weekly meeting, or Wine Talks with Jeff Fontanella?
Wine Talks with Jeff Fontanella.
The best.
So
there's a name for this?
Yes.
That's how it goes on the calendar. So we as a staff, when we sit down and pick Jeff's brain about things, we Wine Talks with Jeff Fontanella. And so these webinars have been a great opportunity for you guys to have Wine Talks with Jeff Fontanella. So please ask questions as we go. Jeff's gonna be talking a lot about these wines, about our vineyard and whatnot. And so please, if you have questions, this is a great time to let her rip. So anyhow, yeah, so let's start. Let's, go on. I'm gonna just show you our little PowerPoint. So this is what we're going through today, is the 2018 Mount Veeder Cab and the 16 Estate Reserve. And so pictures, we had some great pictures about what was going on during COVID as well. Jeff and I, pictures of us bottling with our masks on, everything with masks on pretty much. Fun times, but somehow we've made it through. And another dog in too. We got our second golden retriever through all this. So, okay, back to wine. Let's see. Let's talk about the 2018 Mount Veeder Cab. Jeff, can I pass it off to you to start chatting?
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, the last year has been, quite a pivot. I just want to say I hope everyone out there has been in good health, and your friends and family have dodged the COVID and are doing well despite the conditions that we're all dealing with. So hopefully this summer, they're talking about maybe this summer we'll have a sense of normalcy. So we'll keep hopefully we can keep our fingers crossed and get there soon. So with that, yeah, the 2018. So where should we start? Maybe with how the vintage was. We typically talk a little bit about the different vintages. In a large part, Mother Nature's really, in control of how good the wines turn out. I would like to take all the credit for it, but really a huge chunk of it, the vast majority of it, is how much sun, how much rain, and all these factors that come in and give us and deliver us a really good crop. 2018 was a year, we kind of call it a warm year, but in effect, it was kind of a slow start. It was cool to begin with. We enjoyed a little bit of some inversions here, just having a little elevation. We had a lot of cool days down in the valley. California in general had a very hot year. There were lots of records set, but Napa was kind of in this, a lot of places I think might say it was cooler than normal. So we had this kind of slow start. We had kind of late bud break, late development in certain things. But then as the inversions kind of set up, we started seeing phenolics come on and flavors come in that we were really happy with up on the mountain. And forgivingly enough, the warm kind of finish to the year, which was kind of the defining period for me, let us pick until now. And I think we started picking third week of October-ish, and we started finished bringing in Cabernet about November 1st. So we had this really long hang time and a moderate finish to the fall that was absent of really significant rains and things that could be damaging to the fruit. So what we saw was this really pure character. To me, what I tasted it, that's really kind of a pure cherry that really stayed in the flavor profile from day one. So this really red cherry that's very concentrated, and the to me classic kind of Mount Veeder tannin profile is very densely packed in this wine. We've discussed that the shape of this wine seems to be still kind of tightly wound around this really pure core. And I think that's the way I'm really thinking about 2018 right now, which makes me really anticipate what it's going to be like in a few years. Because if you've got that nice acidity and that pure fruit to age around, you tend to get wines that open up really, really well in the cellar. So this vintage really, it reminds me a lot of 2012, where out the gate, we had nice fruit, but it was sort of tightly packed. And now we just, we reviewed the 12s not that long ago, that the 12 vintage is just really beautiful in the bottle. So that aging potential, I think, is very strong and very, very good with the 2018. Again, it's a blend of Cabernet with a small amount of Merlot. We use some other Mount Veeder Merlots, 4% in this vintage. And yeah, French oak, all in French oak, which is typical of our style. And yeah, I think it's just, when you look at the color and you look at the concentration there, I think this vintage has a really, really good potential to cellar well.
Color particularly something that I've noticed in the tasting room. It's like bright, like neon as the legs drip down the glass. It's a really incredible color. And in the tasting notes per your guidance, we talk about possibly cellaring it for 7 to 10 years. So a couple of questions about that, I guess, just for basics, like when you get the wine and it's at home, what's the best way to store it to ensure that, you know, if you open it in 7 years, it's perfect?
Right. So if you want the perfect grade, you want an A++ from everybody.
I always want an A++.
Of course you do. You're going to think that you want to put it in a dark place, a place that's temperature controlled, and a place that's humidity controlled. Those are the three things. If you have the wine stored at 55 degrees and 55% humidity, and you can keep it stable like that, you're giving it a perfectly stable aging environment. So if you can check all those boxes, that is perfect. Not everyone has a cellar that's designed that way. And so really there's a few factors that you want to kind of think of when you have wine somewhere. First is the temperature. Obviously heat is a big enemy of wine and wine bottles. So if you can kind of picture, you know, when the wine was actually corked and filled, there's just a small amount of headspace there that's vacuum sealed by this cork. If it goes through hot and cold and hot and cold, you're putting pressure on that seal because the wine will expand a little when it gets warm and then shrink back when it cools down. So you're putting pressure on that seal and you're weakening the cork and you're weakening its ability to keep that wine perfectly sealed. So if you've taken wine and maybe you put it in a corner of the house and it's going through 75 and then 60 and then 75 and then 60, that oscillation is not ideal. You like to have that temperature as even as possible. And if you can, it would be great to be 60 or 55 degrees all the time. That would be really good. Now, heat's kind of an enemy. 70 degrees, prolonged, 70 degrees and up, you know, if you have wine sitting there over 70 degrees for a while, you are starting to sort of cook the wine, so to speak. As you get up into the 80s, you're really putting some pressure on the seal of the wine, and you will see wine start to wick and perhaps leak as that pressure pushes up against the cork. When you get to 90 and up, like it can if you accidentally throw it in your car, run into the bank or run an errand, and it's only been half an hour, but it's hot outside, you can get temperatures, you know, very warm, and you can cause leaks right away within a short period of time. So yeah, please avoid anything that's really hot. And conversely, on the other side of the spectrum, really cold is the enemy as well. You can actually create ice crystals to form, and water expands when it creates ice, and you can actually damage the cork or damage the seal that way as well if you got to some extreme temperatures, some very cold temperatures.
Can you talk about the cork, Jeff, a little bit? And like in particular, like I know you said there's 3 main things for storing, but the other thing is that you want the wine touching.
Right. Yes, of course. So you like the wine in contact with the cork. You don't want to store it standing up, right? Because you kind of have air on both sides, and you can speed up the drying out of the cork, and it will lose its elasticity and can kind of break the seal there. So you like to leave it on its side. You know, Bordeaux bottles are kind of designed that if you sell it for a long time, this shoulder will start to catch when it's aged on its side like this, will actually start to give a little surface for any sediment, just natural sediment to collect, almost a built-in mini decanter for when you serve. So yeah, you do want to, preferably you store it on the side, and you let that way the cork's in contact with the wine, and you kind of keep that balance there. And if you
share just a quick story, we've got club members who shall not be named who received a magnum of Dom Perignon. Is that the like supposedly really fancy champagne for their wedding? And
Yeah,
they,
that's like Saturday breakfast. Yeah.
sure, for some of us. And they like stored it on their mantle piece on the above the fire, right? Like straight up and down. It was supposed to be just a showpiece. And for their 25th anniversary, they opened it and they were like, it was terrible. And I was like, was it? I am shocked. Yeah, don't do like them. Names not to be shared.
So yeah, obviously probably not great temperature storage, but the other thing with the mantle, or some of us might have a nice, even a wine fridge kind of thing in a room. It's got a nice glass window, but as the sun moves by, if you get a few hours of direct sunlight in there, light is also a terrible thing for wine. Typically, it's a lot more destructive to whites and rosés. The reds, the polyphenol content, the color can actually resist a little bit of that attack from the light. But the glass, the dark glass of the reds typically does stop some of the UV, but the lighter glass on the whites will let it all through. But as that wine gets hit, it's either one is going to focus some of the energy. So it's kind of a magnifying glass. You don't want it to have direct sunlight. It triggers chemical, let's call it cooking, if you will. It's typically, if you notice it in a white wine, it can be very skunky. You'll open it and have a leaky onion smell, or something very off. And that's considered a light struck wine. So even if you have a nice fridge and it's got a glass door, if it's getting hit by sun during the day, or maybe it's even just in the winter and you wouldn't suspect it because it's not hot out, but as the sun gets low in the horizon and it's shooting into your living room or dining room or wherever this storage vessel might be, if it's getting a lot of direct light, you can definitely damage some wine. And you'll open it in reds. Typically you might think, I'm not sure, but something's off, but you might have some stewed veggie or kind of cooked tomato-ish kind of things that happen. And that's really a light affected problem. If it, which otherwise the wine probably would have been great because the temperature was stable and the wine was kept in a stable place.
Just for all of you guys out there, like when we get ready, we do a release of wine and we pack, I like how Jennifer says she like packs up her little babies and gets them ready to send out. And I think, our job is to make sure that when that wine gets packed in and set ready to go, that it's in perfect condition. And then what we also make sure of is that we try and, monitor temperatures. And so a lot of you guys have dealt with heat holds or cold holds. And the goal really being is that the wine arrives safely to your doorstep, intact and in the condition that it left our winery, and safe and ready to be put in your cellar or to be drank or whatever. And so if when you open the case that arrives, if there's leakage coming out of the bottle, then something happened in transport. But if the wine arrives and it's intact and looks and doesn't have leakage, it doesn't have problems with the cork, then it's arrived safely at your home. And so from that point on, it's really a matter of you taking the best care of the wine as possible, especially if you're planning to keep it for, try and laying it down for 7 to 10 years. Then really focusing on taking care of that wine is going to really, pay dividends when you actually do crack that bottle open. And if wine's gone bad, it's usually because of storage and not because something is wrong with the bottle, unfortunately, most of the time. And so I think sometimes we forget to tell people that how important that part is. And that's why we thought it was important to include today in our webinar. So
I also wanted to share, and again, I won't name any names, but we do have some club members who, so there's lots of ways just to tell yourself not to open a bottle until, right? Like you can get the nice tags that you hang on the neck of the bottle that says, drink in 2025 or whatever. This couple take duct tape and wrap it many times around the neck of the bottle so that if it's like the 4th bottle of the night kind of a moment and they're reaching for their really good ones, they're so drunk that they can't get the duct tape open and they give up and they put it away. So I just wanted to offer that as another option to help you cellar your wines.
Well, thank you to that couple or the person who shared that with you, because I think that's a great piece of information. Duct tape. I love it.
I've not heard that before. That's a new one.
Well, it
Yeah.
hasn't hit Wine Spectator yet, buddy, but I'm sure it's coming. We got a question here from Jen Preschel, club member extraordinaire. And she says, I love that you offered an aged vertical last year. Will you offer that again? Will we? Can we dip into your library again, Fontanella's?
Oh, it's coming out of my library? Oh,
Yes.
no.
Maybe.
They've done a nice job setting aside a couple cases from every vintage. And so occasionally we take a look at what we've got. I'm always advocating for that, fellow Jen. So yeah, keep your fingers crossed.
And I think this is important too. Because people, I think people, they say, Jeff, you probably remember this stat, like what's the average amount of time from the time someone buys a bottle of wine between the time they consume it?
30 minutes? Isn't it 30 minutes?
You mean in America kind of thing, or just across
yeah.
all levels of wine? I don't think it's very long.
That'd be America in that case.
America.
But it's not very long. And so,
but put that in perspective. And we're talking about Napa, only 3% of California. So we're not, I don't know that would apply directly to Napa wines typically. And then we're Mount Veeder, we're less than 2% of the grapes within Napa Valley. So, generalizing wines that you might grab out of the bin at Trader Joe's for under $5 or whatever, and cellaring, usually those things aren't hand in hand, right?
I think it's just
go ahead.
No, you go. Sorry, Carrie.
Oh, lay it down, see what it tastes like. And that's why opening the cellars, the library releases have been good for us, because it's an opportunity for us to tell you how much you gain by doing that.
I've noticed COVID brought on an extended cellar rating. I mean, we've been doing this now quite often. So it's it's one of the best things that's come out of COVID, I think.
I was going to say, that's just not a problem, is it? On the same tack, Michelle is asking how long to cellar a wine. So if you want to just give, quick ballpark. And also I want to say, as your club manager, this is, one of the reasons that we send out 3, 6, or 12 bottles of the same kind of wine, unless you want to customize, is because the idea is like maybe have the cab now and then like put it down for a couple of years. But Jeff, do you want to just hit briefly on Chards and Cab, your Chards and Cab, sort of your sweet spot for cellaring?
Yeah, Chardonnay, I think we just the last webinar where we reviewed the 2010. I mean, that really showed what fruit from here was kind of, I think, reaching a pretty full maturity in the cellar. So, this 10-year type spectrum, I would probably consume, it would ideally be consumed within that 10-year spectrum. What's ideal? That comes down to some preference a little bit. When you got them young, this goes for all the wines, the freshness that's there, the power of the fruit, the impact of the vintage is really prevalent. And as you get some aging, you really start to get we like to say the chapters of the book, the pages start to unfold a little more. They're a little more accessible. So that complexity broadens out. But the showiness and the big part of the youth of the wine, that's what starts to get integrated and mellow out as you age it. Now, the Cabernets, the 2012 isn't even hardly showing any age, but it's really opened. And the bouquet and the fruit and everything at 8 years is potentially still going up. So, what's ideal? I don't know. That was a delicious wine at 8 years. So I think it's less of picking one single ideal year. It's more getting into this zone of really what we call peak drinking. So Cabernets between 5 and 10 years, I think you're in that front end of that window for sure. And I think that they'll extend in age, another 5 or 10 years after that. Zinfandel's a little shorter lifespan. It's just genetically as a variety, the skin and the polyphenol and all those things that kind of help give that backbone and the structure to the aging and the quality of Cabernet. If you think of Zinfandel, it's only 25% genetically there. So it just doesn't have as much to contribute into the structure and the ageability of the wine, just genetically. Now, what that lacks also allows for this nice open fruit forward character to Zinfandel that I think Zin lovers really like. So it's very approachable and the fruit layers are very accessible early on. So I see Zen in this, more in the 3 to 7 years, if I had to sort of put a window on it of nice, a nice window to open those wines for sure.
I call it a peak yumminess window, Jeff, and you can take that as yours.
I can use that. Okay, you didn't trademark it. There's no.
No, not like Wine Talks with Jeff Fontanella. I'm gonna talk to my patent attorney for that one.
Trademark.
Whatever.
Okay, so let's move on, and I'm going to put up the tasting notes on the. I'm probably could be more elegant about this PowerPoint, but anyways, the Estate Reserve. Let's move on and talk about the Estate Reserve. So, I mean, this one obviously, like, I always get so excited when we crack one because it's so warm and close to my heart, because this is truly our baby. And so, so Jeff, talk sweet about our young.
Well, I think a little bit of when we think of the reserve is why is it the reserve, or what's the composition? What differentiates it? A bit of what goes into, or not a bit, the vineyard has very, very many elements to it. So this is 100% Cabernet from our vineyard. So that's the first thing when we're talking about this estate reserve. It's 100%, and that's what estate defines. It has to be 100% grown on the vineyard or at the winery. And you could put reserve technically on anything. So reserve isn't a regulated term, if for labeling concerns. So you may see reserve on anything. It is not restricted. You could put reserve on any label or a box of wine or anything you want. But
can I make my joke here, Jeff? Can I make my joke?
Sure. Of course.
It's not a joke I made up, but I use it a lot. A reserve just technically means I reserve the right not to tell you what that means. So yeah, you can say it with anything.
It's totally true.
In our case, we thought it was the most appropriate way to describe how we make this wine. It is a true reserve in the sense of how we qualify and bring in the lots to actually select out of everything else. So it starts in the vineyard. The vineyard, we have 15 different blocks of Cabernet with many different cuttings in each one. So these were vineyards. When I planted the vineyard, I went to other vineyards that I had worked with and saw different qualities and different aspects in them, whether it be the bouquet of the wines coming off that vineyard, or the fruit structure, or the density of the tannin. And we layered those into the vineyard to try to design in complexity into the wine. So it starts with these many, many lots in the vineyard, and we go through these different blocks, and we pick and harvest and ferment them separately. We pick them on different dates when we feel that the flavors are there or the phenology is there, and they can vary. They vary quite a bit. Just you can really see the different character when you look at cuttings from one of the most famous cuttings from Bordeaux is called 337. It's a very dark, cassis-driven quality to the fruit. And when we're looking at one of the most famous cuttings from Argentina, it's a totally different red fruit spectrum. And they're grown right next to each other on our own vineyard, and they're grown much in the same way. But having those different elements on the spice rack, we say that quite often, but having those different components to then ferment them, evaluate them on their own. Some of them might even have trials and different things in between them. So for instance, if we had 2 tanks of the Bordeaux clone, we might use different yeast strains on each to drive out different characteristics. We might use a little bit of a different fermentation technique, so we get a little different structure to the tannin and in the extraction. So the matrix is very big at the beginning. By the time we're done harvesting a vintage and we have a few hundred barrels to review, there's multiple aspects built into that. And as we go through and taste, and this is always one of the most fun parts of the job, is we get to evaluate all those things. Now, the different barrels, the different woods, the different toast levels, the different yeast for fermentation, all of the different cuttings and different blocks that were in the vineyard. we start to tease out our favorite pieces of that. And as those become qualified as potential reserve, you know, we move on for another segment of aging, and then we requalify and distill the best of those. We again start to reserve what we think is the best of those, and secondarily again, and third and a fourth maybe iteration on certain vintages. So we really are reserving the best barrels out of the best blocks, out of the best trials and everything in the fermentation process. And then we extend the aging, and we actually reserve them in the cellar for an extra year. So that tends to give a little more depth and just kind of smoothness and polish on the tannin, and deliver what I consider a reserve quality wine, you know, and shape to it. So sorry, that was probably a mouthful. There were like way too many elements there. But there are a lot of components that go into selecting this reserve. It's quite fun to do. It's been really interesting to see the design translate into these different elements in the vineyard, for sure.
Well, ask a dorky question too. My husband, who's a winemaker, is a big advocate of like double blind tasting, just to sort of make sure your bias isn't playing any part of what your palate is telling you. And we've only done the estate reserve. We've only bottled and released 2 of them. But when you're doing that whole process, and you and Carol Ann have like purple mouths, and you're tasting and you're making notes on what you like, do you have data on, like, let's say you're tasting barrel 44 or whatever, do you know that this is from block this, that use this yeast, or really at that point, are you just like going with gut and with palate?
We don't do a lot of the double blind.
Before he answers, I just want to say, I picture the inside of Jeff's brain as like a million different Excel spreadsheets.
That's terrifying, Karen.
Somehow he knows exactly where everything's coming from, because that's all I picture when I see Jeff going through this stuff. So go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to conduct tastings, and I've done where we have a little more formal setups at other wineries and things, and it's great if you have the capacity and you've got all the tasters and judges, and you can randomize things and do that. For us, really, it does basically boil down to instinct and knowledge and knowing. You know, I'm coming out of the fermenter, like I'm really looking forward to this and this, and that's going to take me in a direction where I'm envisioning. So, yeah, you could say that the randomization and the tasting elements, you know, I don't know, maybe they're being factored in or out one way or another when we're setting up our trials. But yeah, mostly we're going through in a kind of methodological fashion to taste through everything, and we keep notes and track, and we review notes and things as we go along. So vintages are interesting. 2018 in the fermenter was just was kind of very showy, and we were thinking, wow, this is going to be amazing. And then as its power got into the barrel and started to mellow out, it became a very dense wine. And so teasing out the elements that were going to give us something for reserve was much more difficult in a vintage like that, and it took more time. 16, on the other hand, was more of this like Goldilocks vintage. We always say it wasn't too cold, it wasn't too hot, it wasn't early, it wasn't late. It just really, it was kind of a textbook year, and the wines were much more approachable than the 18s were earlier in their aging life, let's say in the cellar. So yeah, you kind of review those things. You wish you could kind of build some hard and fast rules, but to be honest with you, the barrels are a living and a product. I mean, a lot of people kind of tend to think, oh, well, you use French oak, and it's maybe they know if you think it's medium plus or something like that, it's got a certain toast. Well, you know, the trees are cutting down are hundreds of years old, and the wood varies from top to tail or top to bottom, and that barrel is going to have a very distinctive influence individually. So we might buy a very consistent barrel from a cooper, but each one's going to have its own little nuance. So you know, at times, you know, you kind of hit a barrel and it's like, wow, okay, that is one of our favorite barrels ever. And it might just be that it just happened on the 2008 vintage, and that was that. Just whatever it was, the stars aligned, the vintage was right, the barrel was right, and it just gave us that incredible pop out of that barrel. So it's a different it's the same process every year, but It just has slightly different pathways all the time.
Well, it's interesting because like living with a winemaker is like taught me a lot. For someone who like really most of the time I couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast. But when Jeff starts talking about wine, Jeff would be like, yeah, back in 2014, like block 3, there was a lot of cassis on the palate when I, pulled those off the vine. And I'm like, what?
He's accessing his spreadsheets, Karen.
Yes.
Bloop, 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 bloop.
They're all in there. He's got them all like very well organized by year, by vintage, by block, by variety.
Maybe I need those Google glasses or something, and then you could just kind of.
No, you don't. That would just take you right over the edge. We'd never see you again.
It's just naturally in there for you, though. I think you already have the Google thing in your head. Like
you are Google Glass.
You are.
There's two questions we got that I think are really relevant right now. Bruce Banco, what's up, Bruce? Says, is there a location / block that seems to excel every year? And if so, where is it? I know I'm not gonna take him there. He'll probably try to eat the grapes. And then after that, Charlotte wants to know vintage comparisons, 2017 versus 16 and 18. Go.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So as part of there's a section of the Argentinian cuttings. So they're called clones. I've been trying to avoid that word forever because some people think it means genetically modified, but it just means cutting. It's a selection from a different vineyard. There's a section of that clone 4 cutting from Argentina that's consistently showing reserve quality fruit. I'm very excited about another clone, a French clone that's on the newer blocks as well. We've only had a couple of goes with it, but it's showing some really beautiful shape and everything. Interestingly, when we used to do the blending kits, and those of you who remember the blending kits, you take home your soil types. Those were basically those different cuttings, but we wanted to tell you about the soil type they were in. So in the background, the data that I was collecting actually did show that a lot of you really preferred that clone and selected it in your blends quite often, more often than any of the others. So it was interesting to see how that, and it has a lot to do with the microclimate here, the soil here, and how that certain cutting performs. We have the same clone in Rutherford, or we have it in Pritchard Hill, or we have it on different soil, even on Mount Veeder. And its shape and its structure can be different. It shows where it's from. So, and that goes for all different types of Cabernet. It really does show wonderfully where it's from, in the valley. So that has become, let's say, a slight favorite, that clone 4. Now, what was the other part of the question? 16, 17, and 18?
Yeah, particularly 17. How is it different than those other 2 sandwich years?
So this 17, unfortunately, it was on track to be really, really beautiful vintage, and then the fires came through and took out about 60% of the fruit. So unfortunately, we didn't really get to enjoy the full experience of making that. I mean, we got just a small chunk of the vineyard in, thank God. But when you taste that Reserve 17, you're going to say, wow, it's really similar to 16, and the shape and the elegance of it, the polish of the tannin, and the just really the complexity and the layers in the fruit. So I'm very, very happy about that vintage when that one comes out, next year, right? And then 18, I think what we're seeing with 18 is just that it was compared to 16 and 17, it was a later start, and it was kind of a longer, let's say in general, cooler than those 2 years. So the vine, when it's really hot, respires more acidity, and it can create some nice showiness if it's too hot, and then the wine can be kind of hollow. So when it's cooler, the vine tends to reserve a lot of its natural acidity, and that's the backbone for all of these little esters and things that get branched off of the organic acid pool in the wine. Okay, so the backbone of the wine, that pure cherry, that structure, that's what we're seeing in the 18. So I feel like it's going to take a little longer to open up, as a vintage, but the concentration's in there for sure.
Your organic acid pool sounds like something from the 70s.
So it was my old band. Yeah.
I also always like it when you mention esters, because I know that's like a chemistry person way to say smells, but I always
Things that smell good. Yeah. Yeah.
I always picture them as like little old ladies with like little buns, and the little esters are coming out of the glass.
Oh man, you just ruined it for everyone.
Hired me, buddy.
We did not train that into you, by the way.
but you do let me be me.
We
So
do let
that's
you
on
be
you.
So at the beginning, one of the things that I was telling you, the estate Reserve Cabernet is super special for us. And I think, you know, part of the reason why when we taste it is, I mean, obviously, you know, I've gone through, you know, the process of developing the vineyard and doing all that. But I think one of the things that's super unique that people maybe don't quite realize is that, first of all, not like most winemakers like aren't necessarily the owners of the wineries. And so, you know, when we started this process of building a winery, like it was great that Jeff as a winemaker got to really build the winery from the ground up. And so he built a winemaker's winery, and he built a winemaker's brand too. So, you know, despite my attempts to curb otherwise, he really did what he wanted to do. At the end of the day, he always won. And so, you know, when you taste
Never heard this before.
oh shoot, you were listening?
Like marital counseling, you guys.
Oh man, I'm being programmed for something. I'm in trouble, I think. There must be.
But it's great because I think it really allowed Jeff to really do what he wanted to do and what he felt was right in terms of winemaking. And so, you know, that's always been a fun part of the winery. But what I think takes it to that next level is when you take the estate Cabernet, because he took a piece of property that before we even bought it, did so much research to make sure this is exactly where he wanted to plant grapes to make his estate reserve winery, right? And this wine. And so, you know, when I think back on how much has gone into this bottle from, you know, back in 2015, you know, when we were digging holes and looking at the soil and having geologists out here and telling
That's 2005, Care Bear.
I mean, sorry.
Yeah. Way back machine.
Again, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. So 2005, sorry. It was, you know, such an experience to go through that. And really, Jeff made all of these decisions along the way, from, you know, soil types to vine row direction to, you know, what kind of clones we're putting in, what kind of rootstock and when to plant and how to plant. And he goes out there every day and he babies these vines. And I mean, for a winemaker to have that opportunity is super cool, but to have, you know, us be able to, you know, provide this product that is really, you know, Jeff's baby is really kind of special for us. And so I think, and it's oddly enough is actually quite unique. So I really hope you guys enjoy it and take time to cellar it too and see what happens in the years to come, because I think it really is going to show amazing over time, especially with the intensity of the mountain fruit. So I don't know, my 2 cents.
So there's a question there about, you know, when we're tasting the fruit prior to harvesting, you know, does that help determine, I think, processing?
Love this question.
It totally does. I mean, and it's not just that it's like right before harvest, but it's right after we're getting color and things. You know, the vines go in phases. We'll see bud break here soon. So that's just the stage from the dormant wood where the bud first opens up, the shoot growth will happen. We'll start to have flowers develop, and hopefully they set a nice even fruit and crop. And then there's just these little green BBs, and nothing sensory is happening during these times. The green berries swell, they stay green until the vine goes through what's called veraison, and that's the changing in color. So we start to see the softening of the berry, the sugar accumulation starts to happen. The vine starts thinking, I need to ripen this fruit. So that the veraison is kind of the signaling of that shift from vegetatively growing to ripening fruit. But shortly after there, we're starting to look at skins, look at when it happened, how quickly it happens. We look at how strong the shoots are and what that might indicate. And we start looking at even the seed ripening. I mean, a lot of people don't think about the seeds ripening, but they do. When they're unripe, and this is more towards harvest time, if you start picking grapes that have unripe seeds, they're very bitter, quite astringent. And so you're waiting for those to ripen as well. So it's not just the common thing about how much sugar do you want. We really, most vintages I've been a part of, sugar is not really the main indication of maturity. We in California, we tend to get all the sugar we need. It's more of the phenolics, it's the structure, the way the tannins feel in your mouth. So you do a lot of different type of eating grapes. It's a weird thing for your system. You spend a lot of time eating fruit and coffee, and so that's like your whole morning for like a few months, like every morning. It's quite an experience. But you're checking to see how that all happens. There's points where you're popping the whole berry and you're tasting the whole thing. There's times where you're actually just tasting the skins or just tasting the seeds. And it just gives you all, it just all kind of folds into where you're going with this. Now, that's a long way to answer the question, but say if the fruit and the prevalence of the tannins ripen very early, yes, it will kind of help us change our fermentation a little bit. We're not going to need to really extract so much. It's going to be easier to come out in the fermenter. And we aren't determining those things. They aren't set in stone before we harvest. The harvest happens, they're crushed, we're tasting the juice. They're crushed, we're tasting the berries. The next day we're tasting the juice. We're, multiple times we're tasting it. As fermentation finally kicks off, we're tasting the fermentation. We're just sticking our head in the top of the tank. If the aromatics that come off a fermenter are quite amazing. It's especially at the beginning with Cabernet here, it's like dark cherry, black cherry, and violets. I mean, it's just amazing what the headspace of a tank puts out. It's this amazingly fragrant development that you wish you could like squish and just keep in the wine. But some of that's evolving. Some of it will stay in solution. But it really is quite neat when it first blooms and the fermentation kicks off. There's a big kind of gradient and maturation of the flavor profile, or the aroma profile, just in the headspace of a fermenter. So, yeah, there's all along the way we're taking sensory input and we're processing it into to what we're doing in the cellar or on the crush pad all the way every day.
I love it when you talk about wine, Jeff. And I wanted to offer too that. It's always a good time to visit Napa, but now particularly we're moving from, I don't even know what color we are now, but we're hosting tastings outside. We're about to have bud break. So come out and you can chomp on a grape in the field and see if you think that it is ready for harvesting. And then if you come during crush, you can smell that amazing smell that Jeff was talking about. You can watch them press. It's just, I think the world is starting to get normal-ish again, and we would love to have you guys out to taste and smell all the stuff that he's saying.
Yeah, it's great. And yeah, so for those of you who aren't in California, because of course we, seem to be like constantly updating where we're at. But if you are like, we're on our trajectory is just like the rest of the US, we're on a positive trajectory, and hotels are open. Restaurants are open and wineries are open, even though we're outdoor only. I think they're suspecting within the next couple weeks, we'll be back to being indoors wine tasting as well. I think with the vaccine rollout, it's going to continue on, knock on wood, this positive trend. So Napa is a great place to come visit. We'd love to have you guys out here. And if you guys need help booking trips in terms of like finding places to stay or places to go, Jen knows. And anyone who answers the phone, Paige and Rachel as well, can put you guys in the right direction. But it's fun. Everyone's been home drinking, but now come out and drink with us because we're kind of bored tasting with each other.
Yes.
It's science. It tastes better when you're with other people, I swear.
That's true.
It is better. Okay, so that being said, let's go to our next slide. So we're at our offers. Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
I would love to talk about offers with you. So, so maybe you have some 16 estates and you already drank it. Maybe you don't have some and we've made you really want some. So we wanted to give you a little love and give you a promo code that's going to last for 1 week. 1 week. So I think it expires on the 20th. If you buy 3 bottles or more, we'll comp your shipping. So just use the code ESTATE when you check out. If you log in with your club profile to give you your club discount. If the internet is not a friendly place for you, just email me and I will make sure that I take care of that for you. And then looking forward, our next club release is going to be in May, and it is the Chardonnay and Rosé release, which is good news because we're actually sold out of both of those things right now. So everybody who wants those things is pretty thirsty, and we'll also be back in touch about another webinar around that time. I think that's what I need to say, isn't it, Karen?
Yes, you did a great job.
Did I get an A?
You get an A plus. You get an A plus. You know which one of us sat at the front of the classroom all growing?
I'm just surprised you didn't say the best way to store your wine is like in your belly or something.
Well, damn it. Now I'm realizing that I missed an opportunity to say something horrible.
No, but now she can say that when she's doing tasting. So that was perfect.
Best way to store wine is in your belly.
Yes, of course.
Well, it's been awesome having all of you guys out here. We really appreciate taking your evening to join us and taste through the wines. And we're always here for you. We always have wine for you, except for Chardonnay and Rosé for a little bit. But there's more coming. And like I said, we'll do, when we have our next release, we'll have another webinar. But if you ever have thoughts or ideas about things you'd like to see, things you'd like to taste, offers you'd like to see, let us know. We love responding to you and finding ways that we can do a better job at what we're doing. So thank you all so much. Have a great weekend.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Yeah.
Cheers, everyone.